Stead, we're live.
Hey, thank you, Larry Liberty Guy, and welcome everyone to a special summer edition of In the Dugout. You know, we're taking much of the summer off while we get ready to relaunch the show in the fall, but we are going to do some special episodes on special topics, and boy, do we have one for you today. I am your host, Mike Stenhouse, and since I'll be interviewing a teacher today, I'm gonna go with my Harvard cap just to make it seem like I'm on the same intellectual par as our guest. On today's show, we're going to go extra innings for as long as this interview takes with a brave whistleblower school teacher who wants Rhode Islanders and all Americans, for that matter, to know exactly what's going on in our public school classrooms when it comes to the radical race-based and gender-based curriculum that you've heard so much about in recent months. So grab your favorite refreshment and join us for the sure to be interesting show. But first, I must issue a warning. Some of the images you're going to see on this episode are disturbing. The images are wholly inappropriate for young children. They are intended to create fear and division. But sadly, the truth is that these images and the content behind them are what's actually being taught to our kids, as you will soon see. It's shocking. So what does critical race theory really look like in the classroom? In just a few minutes, you're going to see for yourself. And for the second time in the past 4 to 6 weeks or so, a courageous Rhode Islander has become a national news item. You likely know the story of Nicole Solis, the South Kingston mom, who stood up to her school committee, was threatened with a lawsuit. She became a local and mostly national media sensation. Local media largely ignored her. Now you're going to hear the compelling story today, and as you may have read in Legal Insurrection, on the Wall Street Journal, Breitbart News, and probably other places, the compelling story of student indoctrination from a teacher's view. Legal Insurrection once again did a great job in breaking this story like they did with the Nicole Solis story. I'm sure our guest is going to have more media exposure, and you're going to meet her in just a few minutes. We're very proud that she's agreed to do her first local media with us on here and In the Dugout. And our Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity is very happy that she's joined us. But first, a few more comments from me. You know, we had our Major League Baseball All-Star game earlier this week. And if there was an MVP political all-star issue, it's not the recovery from the pandemic. It's the subject of critical race theory and parents' reaction to this revelation of how their kids are being indoctrinated. Like much of the left's agenda, radicals in academia are trying to impose their divisive theories upon our society. These are wildly radical ideas and not even popular ideas. These are ideas and theories that are not based on history or science, but which instead are designed and made up, I stress that, fictitious narratives that fit their political agenda, a false narrative. Think of the many other false narratives pushed by the left in recent years: the existential threat to our world because of climate change, the voter suppression hoax, a January 6th insurrection false narrative, the false narrative about Russia collusion. There is the no such thing as gender false narrative, the systematic police racism hoax. I mean, I could go on and on. This is what the left does. And sadly, you know, and I've been commenting on this for years, privately and publicly, when I've done speaking engagements. Years ago, we used to laugh at some of these ideas, these crazy narratives, whether at the water cooler at work or at the dinner table or at social events with our friends. We never thought these goofy ideas could ever manifest themselves into public policy or even threaten our way of life, but they are. And they are right now. These contrived false political narratives have regularly now come to dominate the political discourse and media scene like we've never seen before. You know, this politically correct or woke agenda is not just relegated to the fringe radical elements in our society, like academia, colleges, universities, and Hollywood have already been, but it's becoming more and more mainstream every day. The media, big tech, big biz, politicians, even religious institutions, and yes, even now in our K through 12 educational system. And the one false narrative from the left that has caught fire like no other is the white supremacy hoax and the related indoctrination of students with critical race theory principles that you've heard so much about, and how they have so quickly and seemingly completely manifested in our public school curricula. For about a half a year, though, the left has been denying that anything like this is really going on in our schools. Oh, it's nothing more than a made-up right-wing fake news designed to rally their depressed troops after the slaughter of that victory, elections, ousting Trump, winning over the House and the Senate. They say it was just made up. They're desperate to have something to rally the troops behind. They told us that critical race theory in schools was a lie, was a right-wing lie. But just in the past week or so, national teachers unions have let the cat out of the bag, openly and publicly admitting that not only do they support the teaching of critical race theory in K through 12 schools, but they will defend any teacher brought under fire for teaching it, and they will aggressively research and harass, perhaps by even bringing lawsuits against organizations like ours and against prominent individuals, maybe like our guest you are about to meet, who dare to try to save our schools and our children from this divisive anti-American and pro-Marxist propaganda. This false narrative that promotes the idea of the white oppressors over the black oppressed. We know that the left lied about the reality of CRT. We now know they were dead wrong when they claimed that CRT was just a contrived narrative of the right. But they were right when they said that CRT would become a rallying cry for common sense Americans. I don't think the left or the unions fully understand the outrage and the undercurrent that's going on out there in communities and school committee meetings. It's brewing in counties, cities, and towns across America. Even here in Blue, Rhode Island, parents are seeing red. Indeed, parents across America are fighting back and winning. They need to take back their school committees, and they're doing so. Many resignations, many putting them under the pressure. And it's going to be harder and harder now for these left-wing school committees to advance these false, divisive, and what I would call insulting race-based theories. But what about teachers? I haven't heard much from teachers. There was a headline recently about 5,000 teachers across the nation signing some pledge to inculcate students with CRT. This was a teachers union gimmick. And while many teachers may not agree with teaching these divisive theories, I think it's safe to say that pretty much all teachers are afraid of their unions, afraid of school officials, and afraid to speak out about what they really know intrinsically is wrong about teaching these theories to our children. That is all teachers except our guest, Ramona Bessinger. Ramona, thank you for being a brave foot soldier out there and leader of this movement. Welcome in the Dugout.
Oh boy. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, just for fun, I've got my Harvard cap on. I know you've got a cap you want to show us. What cap do you have? Tell us about it.
Oh, okay. It's just a regular old sailing cap.
So you're a sailor.
That's about
cool.
it. No, I actually don't sail that much, but I do enjoy being a passenger on sailboats, so that's fun.
Okay, great. Well, earlier this week, our friends over at Legal Insurrection published your story, a beautiful story you wrote from a teacher's point of view about what critical race theory actually looks like in the classroom. Ramona Bessinger, why now are you speaking out?
Well, because I think it's taken a couple of months to sort of accumulate all the data that I needed, all of the examples. Initially when this was rolled out in September, we really had no idea as educators. I had no idea what was truly happening. In fact, in the beginning, I think I was a big supporter of the curriculum because all I saw was one part of it. I saw the Common Core standards, which we've been using them since 1998. So nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And we were all very, I feel, on board with trying to learn the new curriculum and very, looking forward to the new books that we are going to be using. It wasn't until maybe January. Well, the first thing I noticed was where are all our textbooks and where are all the classroom sets of novels? And I did ask one of the, leaders in our school who just sort of gave me an ambiguous answer, said, well, in the recycling bin, literally textbooks and novels that we had used in the past were going into the recycling bin. So I thought, well,
and we are going to get into some detail
Yeah.
on that later on. So thanks for bringing it up.
Okay. So basically, it wasn't until January when the box
past
loads
January.
of books.
This past
Sorry?
January. This
This
past
January. That's right. All of a sudden, boxes and boxes and boxes of pamphlet style books were being shared out to us as English language arts teachers and social studies teachers. We also had our classroom set of novels, but we had these pamphlet style books. I've never seen anything like it in 22 years of teaching. I've never seen so many bizarre pamphlet style cartoonish characters, meant to increase reading levels, be a part of our classroom.
So this raised some
immediately,
alarm bells with you.
Well, initially I thought, oh, this is interesting. But upon looking further at all of the different readers or pamphlet style books, I started to notice a trend in the narrative, a trend in the imagery, a trend in the characters, in the characterization. This trend became alarming to me after several months. When I brought it to the attention of my administrators, that was met with, the usual techniques that they use to, I think, silence a lot of teachers. And by the way, they're very compelling and effective in those techniques.
So is it safe to assume that what you actually saw happening with these pamphlet style books and the elimination and the recycling of other books, combined with what you're hearing nationally on the news, you put two and two together and say, wow, this is happening in the Providence school system?
That's exactly right.
All right.
Did not know really what was happening initially, just like what the heck is happening.
You got to look into this, right? All right, let's take a step back and do a little scene set. Now, you've been a public school teacher for 22 years, is that correct?
That's right.
And how many years in Providence?
So 7 years in Providence and 15 years in total at Middletown High School. And also I had the opportunity to work at a high school in Canada for a year as well. So cool. So a little diversity in my experience, but I will say never have I seen this kind of a curriculum in any school.
Now, we're going to get more into that in a minute. Just a little more background. So you're also a mother, right? Do you have school-age children?
That's right. I have one school-age child in high school, and that is a whole other story. Lots of concerns there about the reading material and projects.
Now you've received multiple recognitions and honors and leading forums and classes and awards as a teacher over the years. All right. So this is not some aggrieved teacher lashing out, right?
No, not at all. I don't think I've never done anything like this in my entire life. I'm speaking out as a mother, I'm speaking out as a teacher and a human being. Before there's no agenda. It's really a human issue we should all be concerned about. That is my,
got it,
motivation.
All right. Also, as a scene set, you're in Providence schools now, and what's it been? I don't know, a year or more since Providence schools have officially gone under the state's purview. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So everything we're going to talk about today, would it be, I'm not exactly sure how the dynamics of that work, but would it be safe today that what's happening in Providence schools is not happening because a bunch of local Providence school board members? That's happening either with the direct direction, or at least the knowledge and approval of the Rhode Island Department of Education, which for all intents and purposes is running the Providence school system. Would that be safe to say?
100% correct.
So I know we're not going to go into detail on this, but because I know you've got more coming out in future weeks. But is there any doubt in your mind that what we're going to see today from you, this visual journey we're going to soon take everybody on, that the Rhode Island Department of Education is behind this, what we'll just call critical race theory principle push? Is there any doubt in your mind?
There's zero doubt in my mind that they're behind this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Also, just background, Providence has a really high percentage overall of minority students. I've heard as high as 90 to 94% of all public school students in Providence are students of color. Would you agree with that?
That is correct also.
What percentage of teachers, you're not a teacher of color, what percentage of teachers would you say are of color?
That answer, I really don't know the answer to that. So I really can't speak to that. I think clearly we need more African-American teachers and teachers of color. That is number one.
Do you buy the argument that a white teacher can't effectively teach Black students?
Absolutely not. That is untrue. There is no data to support that ridiculous contention. You know, nothing to support that at all.
In your article on legal insurrection, you wrote how everything changed in 2021 over the last 8 or 9 months or so. But before that, let's go back before that. And let's go back, let's stay in Providence. Let's go back to your prior 6 years as a teacher in Providence. The claim is that there is this systematic racism going on in our society, whether it's our schools, whether it's the corporate, wherever it is. What can you say you saw, what you witnessed in schools with regard to this claim of systematic racism? Does it exist in any form at all that you witnessed?
Well, first, I would, systematic racism is a huge topic. So have I seen and witnessed racism from faculty towards students? Or is that, specifically your question? Absolutely not. This, from coming as an outsider, coming into Providence, the one thing that I noticed about teachers and, administrators is an incredible caring. This is an incredibly caring and skilled and, proficient faculty. To assume that there's systemic racism really is a huge stretch. Now, do I know every single educator?
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't know every single person. I'm not
Right.
in every single classroom, but I know the faculty I've come in contact with. No,
we're not talking about isolated instances. Excuse me. Also, the problem with I'm not talking about isolated instances of of an individual doing something that might be dubious, but they claim, the defenders that the whole system is rigged to be racist, from not just the teachers, but the curriculum and everything. What would you, and it needs to be dismantled, torn down and rebuilt, with a different lens on. What do you say to that? What have you seen? Is there any proof of that you've seen?
Show the evidence. There is no evidence of what they're alleging. Okay, you can say pigs fly, and it doesn't mean that pigs fly. So exactly where are the examples of racism? Some ridiculous, item where they mined for that result in some survey that was given to maybe teachers or given to students. This is ridiculous. They're justifying making their whatever change they want to. And, whatever they change, justifying any changes to curriculum that they want by mining for a desired outcome. That is 100% what is happening.
Okay. So you disagree with the notion that everything needs to be dismantled because it's systematically racist at the core. Okay.
No.
Before we get into the critical race theory stuff, just a little more to kind of set it up. You also notice changes in other areas within your school. For instance, the Pledge of Allegiance. Here's a tweet string I found. apparently where they're saying, you know, how come we're not doing the Pledge of Allegiance anymore? And then someone, why do we need to do that? There's other things, I assume, like racism we've got to worry about. What is going on with something? I think it's, and as this person below says, I don't even know the truth of it, that it's state law to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but yet it's not being done. What is your experience with this in your classroom and in your school?
Well, honestly, that is even a discussion is an embarrassment to that teachers are even debating this issue. First of all, it is the law. We are bound by law to recite the pledge. Okay, it is our
Every
duty
day.
to And by the way, the Pledge of Allegiance is explicitly there for all of us. It is there to remind us that we are all Black, white, brown, Asian, we all, or whatever nationality you might, indigenous peoples, we are all in America considered, free individuals, right? And so the pledge is, one, it's the law. Two, it's terrible that this debate even took place. I know in my school, there was a time that the pledge was not being recited in the morning, or it was one morning, yes, at 1 hour, another time. It was very loosey-goosey. The flags were all in disarray, and so I did bring it to my principal's attention and reminded my principal that it was not even an issue for debate, that in fact, it is the law, and he should be reciting that Pledge of Allegiance every day for all children to hear and know, and to feel confident that they are represented in that Pledge of Allegiance. And it's not to be vilified.
So this is part of the subtle change that apparently you've noticed over recent years. Let me ask you this: before this past year, as we've established, you are a white teacher in a predominantly Black. I assume that 90 to 95% minority holds through in most of the classrooms you've taught.
Yes, I think that's
Okay.
about right. Yeah.
And did you have any issues with racial tensions with your students in the past?
Well, not specifically. This past year, I think there was a couple of very sad moments for me as an educator as the year progressed, and I believe the kids were hearing in social studies and English and possibly other classes this narrative about slavery over and over and over again, that they started perhaps to see me as
Right.
as the enemy.
An oppressor, yeah.
That's right. And so a couple of kids referred to me as America. That was a direct sort of
America. That was your
title.
nickname?
It was a name that you could,
As if they weren't Americans?
That's exactly right. And so I said, we're all Americans. Oh no, miss, they said, you're America, we're not. And that to me is very sad. That to me tells me that the kids are getting some sort of a message from someplace that I'm the enemy and they are somehow victims of my, and clearly it was embedded in the projects and the narrative in the books, 100%.
So this is not we had your story on legal insurrection. You've been on Fox News. You've been republished in Breitbart, and the Wall Street Journal did a story on your story, and I'm sure more. You testified earlier this year at a Senate Oversight Committee hearing. We're going to get into a clip from that hearing a little later, not your clip, but of our Education Commission. So you're speaking out. Let me ask you this. Do you consider yourself a whistleblower?
I don't know that I want to associate myself as a whistleblower, but really I'm speaking out as a mother, as a teacher, as a human being, as an American patriot. I love this country and I'm not afraid to admit it, and nor should I be afraid to admit it, although some folks would say otherwise. And that is why I'm speaking out. And additionally, I'm not teaching those lies. I am not going back into the classroom and propagating the lies that we are being told we have to teach. The projects have to go. Angelica Infante Green really has to go because she is at the helm of all of this. And, so whistleblower, no, I'm a human being and the story needs to get out to the world.
You said you weren't afraid of what they thought, but are you afraid of recrimination, losing your job, or any other pushback by your colleagues or students once you go into the school?
There's been plenty of pushback already, and no, I'm not afraid. And here's the thing, we have still First Amendment rights. Last I checked, we're allowed to speak the truth. And you can say whatever you want about these books and about the projects. The fact of the matter is, the truth is right there in our classrooms. We are no longer teaching, and I cannot speak for every single school in Rhode Island, but from what I can see in my children's school and my children in my actual school that I'm teaching, is they are not any longer teaching, and I think I mentioned this as well, the Holocaust. And Frank,
Yeah,
what
we're gonna get
child
into
cannot
that.
relate to, yep, to
We're gonna get into that. Let's hold on. All right. So right now, we wanna show our audience what critical race theory actually looks like in the classroom, the books, the posters, the propaganda that kids are seeing, because it's your contention and mine and many others that American history is now being retold exclusively from the perspective of oppressed peoples during the Revolutionary period, all the way through the Civil War, and even up into today through the Civil Rights Movement into today. So with you, Ramona, as our guide, we're going to now take our audience, all right, you're going to be our guide on a visual ride through what I call the left's never, never land of make-believe. What CRT really looks like and how they're trying to deceive students, unfortunately, and the public, but what's actually showing up in schools. You know, like most rides, it starts out slowly, touches maybe on reality, but quickly evolves into the absurd, something wildly absurd and completely contrived. So we're going to start first with just some posters that that are around the school. We don't have to comment extensively on each one. Here's a poster about all-inclusive sex ed and pleasurable sex acts. But what stuns me about this, Ramona, this is apparently sponsored by Planned Parenthood. Since when do they teach our schools?
I have no idea. Good question. This was shared out in an email from our administration. Now, this poster was not put up in my school, but it was shared out in an email, and we were encouraged to put these in our classrooms. Now, I do know that there is a bill out there on the table, and if it should pass, the bill itself, the language alludes to teaching K through 12, that teachers should be teaching in health ed classes and Lord knows what groups after school, pleasurable, how children can engage in pleasurable sexual relationships.
And
no.
This is 6th grade.
This is not specifically designed for 6th grade. I believe the bill addresses K through 12. This poster was advanced to the faculty throughout Providence. We were all encouraged to post these. This is a good example of what is in my school on the walls. What does a 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader, why should they look at this kind of a poster? And since when are we in the business of teaching children, to dance naked with each other in the woods? I'm sorry, this is not appropriate.
And this was an actual poster in the school.
Yes, outside my classroom, in fact.
And it looks like a little political activism here.
Very strange. So, we all want to be inclusive. Let me say this, okay? It is very important that all children feel that they are respected, no matter what nationality, no matter what their orientation might be. However, it is not our job to zero in on a child's sexual orientation, or religious affiliations or political affiliations. It is not our job as educators to indoctrinate children in this way. Those items need to stay with parents. And how dare a school system, promote that sort of thing? It is not okay. We're not made up. It's dangerous.
And as a mother, you would agree with me. This is also not just about what we're teaching. This is about parental rights as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Is taking issues that should be discussed between parents and children and making those sensitive issues now school property.
All right, let's start segueing into some of the race-based stuff. We know the over-sexualization of our kids, the teaching of either proactively or through not saying the pledge, the anti-American stuff. But here is I don't know if this is a poster or what this is, but this is something in a deck you provided, to celebrate Black History Month, Black superpowers, intersectionality, Black queer community. I mean, this is stuff that's actually being pushed in schools.
Yes.
Wow.
There's
All right.
nothing wrong. Again, I think it's important to say that in isolation as a group or whatever, but it should not be promoted in schools, only because now you have so many different adults with different possible, agendas, backgrounds. You don't know how that information is going to be disseminated out to children. That is, again, not our job. We are not their keepers. We are their educators.
All right, let's get into the main part of what we wanted to discuss today. So these next series of, I assume they're book covers or pamphlet covers, as you call them. So I'm just going to scroll through these back and forth. And you can just comment generally and expand upon what you said earlier, how traditional curriculum, we're going to get to the specific ones that have been thrown out, but how these are now the new curriculum, how, like you just said, any one of them might be fine on its own, but when all of these in total are the only thing being taught, and there is no balance, right? This is something I think you want the viewers to keep in mind, right? That there is no balance anymore.
Perspective.
For teaching our kids, no perspective. All right, so let's share all these with our viewers, and you can just comment. You can tell me to stop if you want to stop on one, but I'm just going to scroll through these. Talk about what you're seeing with the new pamphlets or booklets that are out there.
Just to sort of speak to this and give it some sort of perspective, prior to this new curriculum that was introduced, if we can just stop for 1 second, I want to go back to that picture. Prior to this curriculum being introduced, you have to know first that world literature, American history in its entirety, and multicultural literature, all this vetted literature is now gone from the classroom, okay? So in comes these books. And initially, as you said, just to sort of speak to that point, alone and maybe perhaps as an accompanying piece of literature to go along with the actual factual historical documentation, these books wouldn't be so bad. But when they're the only books in our classroom, when they're accompanying the only narrative, then they become problematic, because then they're becoming indoctrination. If you go back to that one, that sort of conflates, if you go back to the first one, that conflates the American Revolutionary War of 1776 with African American Revolution. Do you see the danger in that?
Yep.
Now you could say that's a stretch, but it is in no way a stretch. We're not dummies.
So that seems like part of the 1619 agenda that
of course,
by the founding of this civilization and country to slavery, when certainly slavery was around, but it wasn't the foundational basis.
No.
What we're talking
and it's important, and let me just say, Mike, it is important to acknowledge the African American contribution, the slave narrative. That is very important. We were doing it anyway.
You guys were teaching that anyway, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
that was part of your curriculum before all this,
That
right?
is
It wasn't like you were ignoring slavery and all that,
yes,
right?
That is problematic. The Trail of Tears. This is addressing westward expansion.
Right.
Trail of Tears, in other words, the white settlers, who, by the way, are called in many of these books white immigrants, oddly enough, or not so oddly enough. The white settlers are seen over and over again as the aggressors. Now, I want to just speak to that. Genocide towards Native Americans was real. We were already teaching that. So why do we need to make it the only story of westward expansion?
Got it. And then they got to get in some totalitarian Saul Alinsky trained person who started public unions largely and radicalism and whatnot. Why is Sears Chavez focused on?
Not sure why this is appropriate for middle school, but again, might be a great resource for a project. We're not omitting this narrative, but it should not be out in the forefront. when we are supposed to be teaching kids universality of, being human and American history, world literature, American literature.
So the left wants, and the critical race theorists want people to believe that we who oppose it don't want to teach honest history. Is what we just saw, if that represents pretty much the curriculum in its entirety, is this new curriculum in any way, can you categorize it as honest history?
Absolutely not. How can you say that telling 10% of world history, 10% of American history is accurate or true? If you're looking for diversity, equity, and inclusion, this isn't diverse, equitable, or inclusive. This is a lie. This is propagating a lie.
All right, we're going to continue on our visual ride here with Ramona Bessinger as our guide. Now, this is the part where I want to warn you, put out my warning again. Some of these next few images are disturbing. In my view, we'll ask our guide as she goes along, not appropriate for young children. But it has to deal with creating a fear narrative, creating a narrative of division between whites and blacks. And it focuses largely on this, the issue of white shaming. Now, again, Ramona, you're going to comment, but what we're about to see are actually more of the textbooks or pamphlets, as you call them, that are now being forced upon students in Providence. So here we go. First,
Yeah.
this, I don't know who this is directed at or where this comes from, but obviously they got to put some backdrop in here.
Wow, this is like, we've got to go to professional development, right? Rightly so, to maintain our teachers' certifications. So a lot of the professional development has shifted from actual classroom practices to professional development around whiteness and
all right, so this one was
people of color.
Teachers. This one was geared for teachers.
This was for the white affinity group. This was attached for the white affinity group to read. I don't know what was in the black affinity group because they didn't share that information with the white teachers. Nothing inclusive about that.
Yep. Okay. We're going to get more into those affinity groups in a minute. All right. So here's some of the things that students are seeing. So we got to make don't forget white shaming. So we got to make George Washington look bad, right?
That's right.
We've got to make those who built the railroads look like white oppressors over. In this case, it looks like Chinese people of color.
Again, Mike, history is not perfect, but not every white person is hateful and aggressive. Look at the imagery here. Look at the imagery.
And again, there probably is some truth to this picture and this
100%.
story, but it's not the only story. Right?
That's right. It's taken out of context.
That's right.
And that's the danger.
Snow White and the Seven Trolls.
Yes, sad. So fairy tales normally are beautiful stories. So anything white in a fairy tale has been vilified, turned into something ugly and scary. I don't even know where they get the legal right to share this story. And this is very good. So Snow White is
even the evil queen. We know she's evil, but of course they have to point that out. She was a white evil queen, right?
That's correct.
And they don't stop at fairy tales. I mean, here you have a great white shark. Great white shark, right?
That's correct. You're getting the image. You're getting the picture here.
Yeah, I mean, again,
if you have hundreds of books that kids are looking at, the kids are going to really gravitate towards the imagery more than the words. The pictures tell everything. So now you have these different level of readers. This would be more appropriate for a younger reader. It would be more appropriate for a child who is an ESL student, English as a second language. Oh, wait a minute, there's a new term for that, but it's, a child learning English as a second language would look at this picture, which we were encouraged to teach, by the way. Don't teach the words, teach the pictures. No kidding, because look at those pictures. You've got imagery of white. Anything white seems to be aggressive.
Yep.
Everything is aggressive. Everything is about fighting. Everything is about, retribution towards an oppressor.
Yep.
Since when did young children become these political pawns to advance this political ideology? When did that happen? And shame on the people who developed this curriculum. Oh,
here's another one that turns a white woman into a man-eating tiger.
Literally, this story is about aggression again. Now, alone, you might say this is a funny story, a funny, interesting myth, but it's collectively mixed in with all of these books that is problematic.
All right, before I get to this next part, so there's your white shaming. So picture, what we showed you first with the Black history, again, on its own, not bad, but if that's all they're seeing, then picture the white shaming. And then it seems like if I piece these, let me put all three of these first before you comment. If I put these next three images together, it seems to me, well, it seems to me, all right, I interpreted it as almost advocating for protest, if not violence. Tell me what you think. Let me show you. First, there's a book called Payback with a black girl sitting on the cover. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, which I assume are the white oppressors. And then The Black Storm is Coming. I mean, almost looks like, to use your term, almost looks like they're promoting black aggression against the system. Would you
aggression of some type?
Am I being hyperbolic here?
No, and you're not seeing the entire picture either. You're not living it every day. So you're catching really this sort of window view, and you're 100% correct. All of those upper level readers, there's no story of universality here. It's all about aggression. It's all about anger and retaliation against your oppressor or your victimizer. It is really unfortunate that children are seeing this and hearing it over and over and over again. This has got to stop.
Now, you call these pamphlet style books unvetted curriculum, leaflet style reading materials by unknown authors. What do you mean by all that? Unvetted, unknown authors?
Well, there was a time when, last year when we actually taught Romeo and Juliet. We know Shakespeare. Everybody knows Shakespeare. We know that when you teach Romeo and Juliet with those wonderful, beautiful, universal themes, whether you're doing an abridged version or a full version, you know that author. That author's been vetted. But we don't know who wrote these pamphlets. I have no idea. In some of them, there's bizarre sexual references that we haven't even gotten, haven't looked at today. Some of them are just inappropriate. The language they're poorly written. We don't know who the authors are. We don't even know who actually read them. Prior to this 2019 bill, you had school committees that would have to vet each book. If you had a book enter a classroom, a variety of school committee members and educators looked at that one book. So now we have hundreds of books. Who's made these books become the gospel for the classroom? When I asked that question, I was told, some politic answer. Oh, well, we had a whole bunch of people in a room. Yeah, one or two
and again,
people.
Those whole bunch of people are not Providence locals. They are the Department of Education, which is running the Providence system. So again,
it was actually a coach for, in this case, it was the people who were the coaches for the company that has the books, right? So the company,
representatives of the book companies who wanted to make a big sale. Okay.
Yes, they made the decision. We still don't know who they are. Who are they?
But still, the Rhode Island Department of Education, as we said earlier, had to approve all this, right?
That is correct.
As the overseers of the school system.
Yes.
Do you have any reaction from your colleague teachers, how your students react to all these books?
Yes, there was a lot of pushback about the books. A lot.
From the students?
Now, the kids. Oh, you'll hear perhaps on some news station, kids love these books, and aren't they? They're all magically increasing their grade level because they're reading these wonderful books. No, that is not true. It is untrue. And there was a lot of pushback from colleagues. There was a website started on Facebook, a group of concerned teachers that actually were speaking about the curriculum and their complaints. Now, you might have some educators who will say, oh, isn't this great? We have all these great books. We've got this, everything's embedded in one spot.
Well, what about the students themselves? Do you think they were buying all this?
No, they were sick and tired. By the time we got to westward expansion, and I'm an English teacher, so everybody was sick and tired of hearing about the same thing. And quite frankly, some kids were embarrassed by it. You know, after a while, they get tired of hearing about the same. They wanted me to read to them stories from the Holocaust. They wanted to hear about that.
All right,
you know?
let's talk about that, because it's a double whammy. Not only are they pushing this new material, but they're removing the traditionally proven former materials.
That's
like
right.
like what we're seeing here. What would you like to say about that?
Well, this is a little example. You know, every grade has their vetted materials, but this is the overview. Gone from our curriculum is world history, literature, American history. You can read the slide yourself. The Harlem Renaissance, I'll speak to the Holocaust because I know some people don't think it's important to teach the Holocaust, but I do. I think it's very important to speak about world genocide, and so that children who are coming here from other countries, who are fleeing oppressive governments from other countries, can listen to the story of Anne Frank, understand what Hitler did in the Second World War, and understand that they are not alone, and that we are here in this country to protect them, and that we are not the enemy here in America, but rather we are the purveyors of safety and truth. So the fact that we're not teaching the Holocaust is suspicious to me. That we're not teaching genocide is suspicious. Why aren't we teaching it? Because perhaps this company or this the Rhode Island Department of Education does not want children making meaningful connections between what happened in the Second World War and what is actually happening right now in this country.
That's quite a statement. And as we can see in the lower left here, no more Romeo and Juliet or Shakespeare either, right?
No, sad. The kids love that.
All right. So as we said earlier, the left, I think their story's been blown because of the teachers union coming out as openly as they did, and honestly for once. But there's a lot of people still out there. I see it all the time. It's the pushback I get, that this is still all made up, that this stuff really doesn't exist in the classrooms. I got into a tiff with a radio personality who said, oh, come on, there's no critical race there. Somebody prove it. Can anybody say critical race? They're not teaching it by that name, right? It's just this flood of related stuff that's coming in. So what do you say to the left and to the media personalities like Tara Granahan, who challenged me and refuses to believe that this stuff exists? Does critical race theory principles actually and really exist in public schools?
We aren't stupid is what I would say to Tara. And I would like to speak to that because it is correct that we do not teach critical race theory in the classroom. However, the theory and the tenets of critical race theory, Project 1619, and whatever other buzzword is out there to represent whatever title on the subject, all of those tenets are reflected in the literature the children are being made to read, in the projects they're being made to write, in the discussions being had in the classroom. All of that is embedded right there in the curriculum. So do not speak to me like I am stupid, is what I would say to Tara. We know what's going on, and we're not fooled by the Trojan horse that they've wheeled into the stadium.
I'm going to come back to that. Larry the Liberty guy who introduced our show and is our producer he's also an excellent writer, wrote a piece that we published, you can see last month, just a few weeks ago, on the Ocean State Current. And it reviewed the Providence Summer Reading List. Again, I'm sure it's a list maybe not created by, but certainly approved by the Rhode Island Department of Education. And as the title says, not only does it have critical race theory stuff in it, but graphic homosexual and explicit sexual content. I mean, disgusting. I'm not even going to talk about it or highlight it on the show. It
is disgusting.
It is so disgusting, especially the sexual content. We've talked about the race theory stuff, but you're right. the kids are being, this is the official summer reading list, and this is the
Yeah.
stuff they are being forced to read.
Sad.
Your thoughts on that?
I think this is so alarming. Every parent needs to be very, very concerned. Every educator needs to be very concerned. Kids in high school need to start speaking out and not being afraid. We need to advocate for our young people in society because they are going to be going into the workplace. And if they are conditioned by this sexualization, and if they are conditioned to believe that all Americans, all white Americans are evil, we are in great and grave danger. And you can laugh at that, but what you're showing me right there, being pushed by our, Angela, the head of the Rhode Island Department of Education, that is shameful and disgraceful.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the book Stamped?
Yes, I am.
Now, I don't know if you know who Ray Rickman is. Ray is a dear friend of mine, even though he holds completely, in most cases, opposite views. He's one of the kindest, gentlest people I've met, but he's very very into this diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial stuff. But
That's okay.
even he told me, but he's been on the show. He's very gracious. We have very good intellectual debates. Even he told me this book Stamped is disgusting and not appropriate for children. Yet it's on the summer reading list. And is it part of the curriculum in school as well?
It is not part of our curriculum, and nor would I teach it if that landed on my desk to teach.
Is it actually being taught in the classroom?
Not my classroom. No, not my classroom. I have not seen it, but I do know it's on that summer reading list pushed by Angelica Von de Green at RIDE. So let me just speak to that. It is not our job to teach political ideology to young people. Children can come to their own conclusions after talking to their parents. They can come to their own conclusions when they're mature enough to come to those conclusions. To push a politically charged book onto young minds, no, that is not appropriate. It is not our job.
Just kind of jumping back a little. I'm sorry, it's a little out of order here, but here's a picture of you in your classroom. Apparently from, I don't know when, you tell us when, but it's showing how you prior to all this, you guys were teaching
yes,
the plight of African Americans and slavery and all that other history.
Yeah, that was a picture that was just taken by, anyone who teaches with me will be able to attest that I love anchor charts. I love Post-it notes, and I love to make things visual. So this was taken, this was taken because my classroom was absolutely filled with these poster charts. But what is compelling about this, and I'm glad that somebody picked up on this, is that Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry is about racism, about cruelty, human, issues that we can all relate to, but more specifically, issues that young children of color can relate to. This has been removed from our curriculum. Martin Luther King, in this particular unit of study, I brought in the poetry of Maya Angelou.
Yeah, here it is up here.
That's right. Yes, there's the proof. I brought in the poetry of Maya Angelou. I brought in the speeches from Martin Luther King, the poetry from the Harlem Renaissance group. Tupac even came into the picture. I had probably more African-American literature in my classroom than I did of the white literature. In fact, I made it a point to include, you can go to any of my lessons, nothing gets erased from Google Classroom, and you can see that every one of my lessons has an inclusive entire representation of vetted materials.
And what I can see here is how you can just see it from this picture. Oh, you're painting the entire picture, right? You're
right.
Not just representing one narrow viewpoint, but you're putting it in proper perspective. This all these little stickies and posters proves it. But what you're seeing now, to draw the contrast, That's all gone and only one narrow view is being presented. Is
Yes.
that correct?
We were as educators contextualizing everything we were teaching. That is not being done now. It's very scripted. We're held to this timeline. We're told to ask these questions, to have this sort of a discussion. And clearly, when you go from class to class, and this year, because we were moving from class to class as educators, I had an opportunity to see what was being taught in other classes. And it wasn't, it was very sort of myopic, one-dimensional, all directed towards that slave narrative. Again, I want to be clear about this, an important narrative to teach, but not one that should be only taught.
Exclusively taught, right. Do teachers have any choice in this? Do they have to use those books? Can they bring in their own books? Do the schools have to accept those books? What are there choices being made? We know that the Department of Education, even the federal government, which I'll ask you about in a minute, is pushing this stuff down. But is there any choices that can be made by staff to head this off?
Well, Angelica Infante Green would say that the staff chose this. That is a lie. What happened was a group of curriculum, people who volunteered to be on the curriculum committee might have sat with a whole group of administrators, et cetera, and had a choice of maybe 3 curriculums or 5 curriculums seems to be it. However, all of those platforms include books that are all the same. So the choice is choose between curriculum A, B, and C, but really A, B, and C are exactly identical. So no, you really don't have any choice. You're told you have choice, but there is no choice. And could I teach Anne Frank instead of westward expansion and oppression? And no, the answer to that is no, I could not. Now they might say, oh, after the fact, oh, no, that's not true. She could have brought in, but no, we weren't encouraged to do so.
All right, and as we hinted at with a letter or a little flyer that we showed earlier, this and what you kind of alluded to, just tell me a little, this is really disturbing to me. That when it comes to professional development of teachers, that you are now being segregated and separated by the color of your skin. We have
that is correct.
Educators of color affinity groups, white identifying educator affinity groups. I notice how identifying is used. So if you were to identify as a black, I mean, that's just an aside. Yeah. I mean, it's fun. But what's going on here?
Insanity is going on. That's what's going on. They just because, a whole ideology is being pushed. And the thing is with this idea, this notion that white people are different from Black people. We are not different. We are all the same. And yes, are there injustices? Absolutely. But to separate people out because of the color of their skin is basically racist. So how is this helping to create a more diverse and inclusive classroom? It is not.
All right, I just want to mention this. We're getting long. I don't want to spend any time, but I just want to show this to our viewers. It's gotten to the point where one teacher group actually offered bonus points to students if they would defend critical race theory. This headline says at school board meetings, we know that students were also incentivized to join into testimony for a bill that would put forth by Representative Morgan that would seek to ban the teaching of any kind of racial stereotyping, that students were incentivized to become protesters. Are you seeing that just in general in Providence as well, that not only are we just teaching this stuff, but they're encouraging students to act out on it?
Yes, that is happening 100%. Well, we see Black Lives Matter posters all over the school. Again, not a problem for kids to join a group that they feel is, expresses their views. But the kids are in a way becoming militarized against one another. So, they're being encouraged to, sorry?
And against you as a white teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Now you described
in your article. Now that's a hard thing for me to say, but I'm going to say it, yes.
Now you described in your article, I'm sure it's right along with what you're saying, that the overall school culture is now tense. You are feeling that tension.
For a variety of reasons, the climate is tense, but you'll have an administrator who will come out with, present a whole other picture of what's happening. But it's been very, very tense. And it has been off and on, I think, for Providence school teachers who are always under the gun. And as an outsider coming in, I really think that is an unfair injustice that needs to be spoken. Teachers need to be, 2,000 educators. These are some of the best I've seen in my career, 22 years. They're excellent teachers. That's all I want to say. And shame on the John Hopkins report and, the governor's, I think it was Governor Raimondo at the time, just slamming they know nothing about what they're talking about. And really, this has nothing to do with Providence teachers. This really has to do with taking over the school department. So why? So they can bring in this curriculum unquestioned, untested, and have that John Hopkins report of how terrible the teachers are in Providence to support that political agenda. So don't be fooled by, that outward media kind of presentation that all teachers are bad in Providence and somehow Ride and the governor was there to save the day. Oh no, that's not true.
Interesting. All right. Let me ask you a really hard question.
Go ahead.
It's really more hard for me, less for you. And if you choose not to comment, don't comment. But it seems to me, now, let me first say, as you may know, as some of you, I played professional baseball for 8 years. I had roommates who were African American, who were from Puerto Rico, who are from South America, Latino, Black, white. I'm trying to think if we had any Japanese players on our team at the time. Not back then. I'm an old guy. It wasn't happening. But we were all brothers. There were not these tensions back then. But you've been teaching. When you're on the same team and you're playing together, competing together, sharing a locker room together, sharing roommates together, going out, having a few drinks after the game, you get to know people pretty well. You get to know your students pretty well. Now, I did it, it's been 30, 40 years since I've been involved in that. You're doing it now, so maybe attitudes have changed. But it seems to me that this whole critical race theory, which is supposedly there to help minorities, backfires because it seems so insulting to me.
That is correct.
Does to me. I mean, it's so insulting to think and demeaning that you're being told that because of your race, you're too weak and you've been subjugated and are not able to stand up on your own because another race is oppressing. Terrible. It just seems so goddamned insulting to me. I'm sorry. Yes. But, and maybe I'm out of my element, but tell me if I'm wrong about that.
It is insulting to our children of color everywhere to tell children that they are victims and to propagate and to lower create a glass ceiling, if you will, is child abuse and insulting and really infuriates me as a mother. If I were a mother and my child had to listen to this day after day after day, I would be incensed. My kids are hearing something different, but similar. This political ideology has no place in our classroom. Okay, if you want to have a group after school and do whatever you want, that's fine, but not in the classroom. And by the way, we had
from a human perspective, not from a political perspective, isn't it?
Yes, it's heartbreaking. Okay. It is heartbreaking for me. That is why I'm speaking out. And if if they want to fire me, have at it. I'm going to go on the record saying what I'm saying. I stand behind what I testified at the State House. I'm going to stand behind this interview. I stand behind the article I wrote. If you want to have an honest debate with me, have at it, because I guarantee the truth will always win over this. And it's heartbreaking. The truth will always prevail over this
I hope
lie
so.
that's being propagated. And I will say this, we had a principal last year, I won't say her name, but she was one of the best principals I've ever had in my entire teaching career. And she was African-American, truly an amazing leader. I don't know one teacher in that school that that felt disrespected or felt that we were somehow treated differently, or that we were treating anyone differently. Sadly, she is not in our building anymore, and I don't know where she is, but there's a great example of an African-American leader who was in our school, and she was amazing.
Okay.
Anyway,
All
sorry.
right, let's shift the conversation
Yes.
to the education commissioner just for a few minutes. I know we've gone long. Are you okay with spending a little more time? Because I still got some important areas.
I am. That's
All right.
okay.
Thank you for your time. So, Ms. Infante Green, our director of the Rhode Island Department of Education, you know, you've been pretty direct about her. I have as well. I'm going to be inviting her to come onto this show and counter whatever she would like to counter, and we'll give her an open forum. Of course, we'll challenge that. But I found it very telling. A clip, I don't know if you saw, it was a Twitter-based clip, which I'm going to share if I can in a second here, from maybe it was the same Senate Oversight Committee hearing you testified at, where Senator Jessica De La Cruz asked the director Infante Green about this topic. Here is just a quick 70, 80 seconds of that response.
I didn't talk about race. What I said is that we have bias training because we all have bias. So we all approach something from what we've learned, right? I come from the city. I have a bias in terms of, let's say when I'm taking an assessment, when they talk about, I don't know, hay or something that I'm not familiar with. So we all have a bias. The training is on bias. That's what we're doing it on, and how we see the world and how we talk about what happens in the classroom. So it's not about focus just on race. It's a focus on bias, which we all have, regardless of age, regardless of color, regardless of where we were raised. We all have a sense of bias.
So I decided just to stop there, but
Good.
I mean, what's the difference between bias and racism? I mean, isn't she just playing word games here?
She's not even, she needs to go back to school and learn the meaning of the word bias. She does not even, what is she even talking about? And what educational value does anything that she said have for our students? Has none. She's just basically talking nonsense. She did not answer the question. Do we have bias? Clearly, every single human being on this planet has some sort of bias because we're all raised differently, different cultures, different families, different values. Is that bias a negative thing? No. Do we need to be taught that we have bias? What educational value does this have? And why would the Commissioner of Education be going on about bias? Well, you know why she's going on about bias, because you know what she really means is racism. She's trying to equate the two.
She's talking about racial bias. I mean, she didn't say the word, but that's what she's talking about. It's obvious.
Yeah, it's
all right.
Clear.
Just a comment here. We're going to do some follow-ups on this topic. I had as my guest many months ago, national writer for National Review, Stanley Kurtz. And we talked about how under the Biden administration, school districts, maybe directly, or states, either are being offered or are going to be offered incentives to teach these theories in their schools. They're basically going to try to bribe school systems into teaching this stuff. So I just want you to be aware that our viewers more to be aware. I don't want to go into any more detail on that now, that this,
Oh, I already know. I can
this
speak to that.
downward top-down pressure does exist.
Oh, yes.
Agree with that? I don't want to go
Yeah.
into detail,
Oh.
but disagree with
Yeah,
that.
we don't, that's another show, but
Yeah.
that is exactly what's happening. It's in the form of the stimulus funds.
Right, right, exactly. Now, and it's all under the guise of something else. Now, you are also well aware that in 2019 there was a legislation passed in Rhode Island that gave the Department of Education unprecedented authority to create curriculums that school districts must follow. Now, they make it sound so again, we're centralizing control, we're taking power away from local school boards, and from what I understand, they have to choose from one of the approved curriculums. But every curriculum choice includes heavy doses of all this gender equity and racial equity stuff.
That is correct. Yes. And nowhere in that bill did it say we would be removing all other examples of a comprehensive American history. Nowhere does it say that, but that's what, in fact, they've done.
So they opened the door, right? The General Assembly, lawmakers themselves opened the door to this kind of dictatorial tyranny, I'll call it, over our systems.
Yes,
and
they did.
And I think it's incumbent on them now that to try to close that door. And you may know Representative Patricia Morgan's bill. It's
right.
6070 that was heard in March but tabled. That would essentially ban such teachings. Would you support a preemptive, or I'm going to say closing the door on a mistake they opened in 2019? Do you support that legislation from Representative Morgan?
I don't have the legislation in front of me. I do know I support Pat Morgan and her agenda and initiative to take racism out of our schools. So yes, I support that because that is what she would like to do. Because currently this curriculum, although that 2019 bill was not intended to create this animal, that's what, in fact, what's happened. So
consequences, right?
Yes, and she's been also vilified, and that bill has been vilified and misunderstood clearly because they don't want, checks and balances. But I do believe there's some sort of civil, there could be some civil action here, not civil action, civil rights violation as well. So who cares what the federal government says? Again, they can say that the sky's purple, you can't advance something that isn't true. You can't just say, oh, we want to teach kids to be a certain way or think a certain way just because we're in charge now at the federal level. No, this is America. You don't get to do that.
So you are well educated on the state and federal, push on this. You have spoken out, this week. You spoke out in testimony. You mentioned in your article that you've been subjected to attempted intimidation and harassment. What did that look like, and what did you mean by that?
Unbelievable, actually. Well, not that, I can't speak for every educator, but I will say that, that's probably a good way to put it, that, allegations were made, ridiculous things. Like, I'll give you an example. I was told, to be, like all this sort of grandstanding around walking out of a building incorrectly or pronouncing a child's name incorrectly, just bizarre things, things like that are not
all of a sudden they're coming after you for anything.
You walk into the building or you look a certain way or you're doing something, you said something, and sadly they're getting children to write statements about the adults in the building. Who does that? This is not what is going on here, Mike. We need to all be concerned. This is really scary.
Mona, again,
and worrisome.
You are courageous and brave, and I hope you serve as an example for more teachers. We're going to get into that. Let's talk about the unions right now, the national, more at the national level. So it's now clear. We now know. In fact, I have just a little headline to share. We now know that both the national unions, Providence Teachers Union is part of the American Federation of Teachers. The larger teachers union is the National Education Association, AFT, NEA. But a lot of the news in the last 10 days, 2 weeks has shown how the unions are now outing themselves. They are now admitting that they nationally are openly pushing for this critical race theory stuff, that they will defend teachers who come under fire for teaching it, and they may even sue people like you or me, as I mentioned in our opening commentaries. Randy Weingartner, president of Americans for Teachers Unions, has been all over the national news earlier this week. I found it disgusting, the things we were saying. Your thoughts, since I assume, are you a member of AFT Union?
Yeah, I'm a member of the PTU.
Providence, which is an AFT affiliate, right? But
Mhm.
your thoughts on the national president, Randy Weingartner, and her union's push for this racial divisive stuff?
First of all, unions have no power to decide curriculum. It is not her place to suggest a curriculum. First of all, I'm going to assume Randy Weingartner does not understand fully what she is talking about. What she may be talking about is
honest history.
That what she probably is, we all want diversity. We all want to be, make sure that racism is addressed. That's a given. What she's saying needs to be taught in schools. I believe she's either a pawn of the federal government. Again, a whole other discussion, or she's not very bright and she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's one or the other. But to just say on national television, well, we're going to harass and intimidate and scare teachers into submission. We're going to ensure that this race-based curriculum is going to be taught in our schools. What is going on here? Have you ever in your entire life heard anything like this or known anything like this? No, there's something else happening here. This is about a political agenda. And this political discussion is not hers to have with educators.
And it's just
okay, she can talk about union business all she wants, but to talk about what kids are reading in the classroom without actually reading the books, that is not okay to do. And she needs to retract her statements. Okay. As far as our local union, I don't know. I will say that there's a lot of focus, as there should be. Our union does an excellent job of addressing race issues, race problems, providing workshops, providing curriculum materials. So, nothing wrong with that. The job is already getting done.
I heard the Providence Teachers Union, again, the American Federation of Teachers affiliate in Providence, I heard their president, Mary Beth Calabro, on the radio. She pretty much dodged the question about race and all that. She really did dodge it, and the interviewer didn't really press her effectively, in my view. So I'm not aware of any public statements she's made in support of CRT. Are you aware that she has taken a position, Mary Beth Calabro, the Providence Teachers Union president, either for or against these divisive teachings?
I would say that Mary Beth is for fairness, decency for all. That is what I would say. And I think, I cannot speak for her. I really can't.
Okay.
I don't know of one educator who has said to me, oh, this is great that we're going to have the CRT in our schools. I don't know anyone. I think everyone's like, what is going on? And why is this happening?
You can speak for you. So let me ask you this, a personal question. You pay dues to the AFT. Much of those dues, as do your fellow teachers in the Providence schools. We've seen what they're teaching in those schools, what's being pushed on them by the federal government, by the Department of Education, by the national teachers unions. Much of your dues dollars go nationally to those teachers unions. So how do you feel about your own dues dollars being spent to advance critical race theory in your own school?
Well, let me just say, I had no idea that my union dues were going towards that. So I would have that's an issue that maybe a discussion I would like to have with my representatives that I haven't had time to have because I just learned of this. It shouldn't be allowed because as far as I know, the union has no say and should have no say contractually in what curriculum is used. And by no means should our dues be going towards purchasing, curriculum materials. I've never heard of that personally. So I'd have to research and find out.
Yeah, I doubt your dues
before I
are being,
respond.
I doubt your dues are being used to actually purchase the materials, but they are creating the political influence to see this program. It's a high level political campaign. I mean, the National Education Association, for instance, said publicly that they're going to join with I'm reading here, we're going to join with Black Lives Matter at schools and with the Zinn Education Project. He's a left-wing, false historian. And they want to call for a national day of action to teach lessons about structural racism and oppression. Now, this Zinn guy was a Marxist, an opponent of American liberty. And he's
my answer would be
left. So
yeah, if that is in fact the case, then that needs to be, I want to see how much of this money is being used to advance that political agenda. And my guess is there must be some law in the books that says that they have no right to do that.
Here's the Wall Street Journal story from yesterday that basically was a rehash of the legal insurrection story. They put an interesting spin on it. Mm-hmm. This is you. This is you right here. The lessons lost when critical race theory arrives. But they asked the critical question: will American teachers stand up and reject the destructive ideologies backed by their unions, which is exactly what we were just talking about?
Well, if we believe this,
how would you answer that question? What do you think?
100%. If this is in fact where education is going, and this is being sanctioned by the government, and this is becoming law, and I'm going to be mandated by the Rhode Island Department of Education, and now the federal teachers union, every single teacher should walk out of the classroom tomorrow.
Should, but will they? Even if they disagree, will they?
I can't speak for everybody. All I'm saying is we cannot propagate a lie. We're teaching kids to do the right thing. We teach them not to plagiarize. We teach them to be thinking critically. How can any of us go into the classroom and teach this garbage? And it's an ideology. Exactly. How are we supposed to do that? I wasn't trained to be a Marxist. I was not trained to teach this. No one has been trained to teach it because it doesn't really exist. It's right. An ideology. False it's narrative. A thought process.
All right, final round of questions. I'd like to give you a short message to various audience groups that may be watching or may watch this in the future. And thank you for all your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Enlightening, it's eye-opening, it's shocking.
It is.
You've seen today, it's visual tour. I mean, you got to see it almost to believe it. Everyone's been talking about it, but I don't think anybody's ever shown it. I haven't even seen it on national TV. I don't think everyone's shown it like we've shown the audience today. All right.
I would agree with that.
So as a parent yourself, there are many parent groups popping up all over the state. We've featured many of them on this very show, on this In the Dugout show, and we'll continue to feature them. What is your message to parents? Can they win this fight?
Whether my message to parents is to get involved. Now, parents are busy and not everybody can get involved. Take it one quarter at a time. This is a very important message to provide because a lot of parents are overwhelmed by this. So I'm going to say it right now. One quarter at a time. When your kids go to that classroom in September, ask specifically what book, what project is being taught that quarter in those main core subjects. Take it one increment at a time. Start with English and history. That is my advice.
A friend of mine, someone I think you may know of or know personally, Bob Caradillo, who runs a Westerly Concerned Parents Group, Westerly Parents Against Indoctrination, something like that.
I know Bob well.
Earlier this week, he brought a resolution for it on Wednesday evening to the Wesley School Committee, a resolution that was admittedly modeled after Patricia Morgan's bill that would basically end this kind of racial stereotype teaching.
Mhm.
And while I didn't see it, I heard it was a brutal meeting, that he was humiliated, that the unions brought out teachers in force and other advocates. They did what was called a brutal hit job on this guy. And eventually the resolution was defeated, I believe, by a 6-0 vote. So parents are trying to fight. The system is beating them down. And I would say, Ramona, that
No,
thanks to
yeah,
you, you're going to give more courage to more parents and more
I
teachers.
hope so.
I just wanted to make that point. Okay, as a patriotic American, as you described yourself earlier, when you see how CRT is transcending, not even just in the classroom, but in the, not just the media, but in the big corporate boardrooms and the training programs there, even in our military, and certainly throughout our government, how does that make you feel as an American?
Shocking, really. I see it everywhere. And I think we all need to be concerned, very, very, very concerned, because I don't believe this is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I believe this is something else. It's a political agenda, and it's moving rapidly in all aspects of our culture, and it needs to be addressed. And people should not be afraid. They need to advocate for themselves, and all people should come together, especially African Americans who are being used currently to advance this agenda.
Used.
Yes, used. The whole argument that is presented about, the racial divide. Well, prior to those, we never had, yes, again, there's racism. I'm not discounting that. But there was more work going, to trying to advance more equitable and diverse communities in education. And I would believe in the corporate world prior to this big sort of push that happened in this past year. My message is, do not be, we all need to get involved, because this is something that is going to change our world.
Freedom requires eternal vigilance. I believe Thomas Jefferson said that, and it's never been more true. All right, 2 more. As a voting citizen now, you're also a voting citizen of Rhode Island. What is your message to elected officials, lawmakers at the state level, at the school committee level, the town level? What's your message to them? Many of whom are just, I'm not sure knowingly, but are caught up in this fervor.
Yeah. A lot of people are caught up in, they get caught up in the Trojan horse. Look and see what's in that Trojan horse, okay? This is not about improving schools and creating a more diverse community and racially equitable community, whatever. This is about total to control and takeover of our culture. It's about erasing American history and culture. And it is about a new regime and a new way of thinking coming, sort of replacing that. And I will say that legislators who buy into the sort of Trojan horse story need to knock it off and get with the picture and educate themselves as to what is really happening here. And we all need to be very concerned.
All right. Finally, our kids are watching all this.
Yes.
They're watching these disgraceful spectacles at school board meetings.
Yeah.
They're being brought in as pawns themselves by teachers.
Oh, yes. As weapons, political weapons.
They're holding signs. They're cheering for things they know nothing of. They're being taught this. They're witnessing this stuff. They're seeing it on the news. They're seeing it in their books. I don't know if they talk about it among themselves. But again, as a mom first, as a teacher second, what is your message to young people and students? Is it different to the young Black student than the white student? But what is your message?
My message is this: do not be afraid to hold fast and hold on to your values as young people looking towards and pursuing the American dream. The American dream is alive and well, and there are more caring, loving, peaceful Americans that embrace all people than there are hateful divisive Americans. Do not believe the narrative that is being pushed in your classrooms. If you're being told that America is not to be trusted, or that white Americans are not to be trusted, question that and don't be afraid to stand up to, and to be a believer.
Ramona Bessinger, you are a hero. You are courageous. And I think your story is just only beginning to get told. It's a compelling story. I'm so glad we're able to chronicle it in the very detailed way we did. We've been talking now almost 90 minutes, or the whole show, our longest show ever, but it's the most important topic ever. You recognize that. Thank you for speaking out. I wish you Godspeed and safety in all this, and job security. Final word from you for our audience.
Well, my final word is do not give up. We are Americans. We have a great country, and this country is for all of us, and we cannot lose sight of that. Don't let them tell you different. Not students, not children, not adults, not parents, not stakeholders. All of us, we're all in this together, and don't believe the lies that you're being told in that classroom.
Thank you, Ramona Bessinger. To our audience out there, this is not a topic. This is a special edition summer version. We're going to be having more of these versions soon. We'll be asking a lot of people what they thought about our interview today. We are going to invite Director Infante Green to appear on this show. Doubtful she will attend, but we will make an honest effort and we will give her every open forum. Again, thank you, Ramona, for your time. Thank you, audience, for staying with us during this long but very, very worthwhile show. And we'll see you next game on In the Dugout.